I refused to cancel my wedding to please my mother. She announced in front of everyone, "I'll never bless this marriage." My fiancé walked out muttering, "Maybe she's right." Broken and humiliated, I discovered the real reason she tried to ruin my life. I should have seen it coming. I should have known the moment my mother pursed her lips, took a deep breath, and gave me that fake, pitying smile, the one she always used right before she ripped something apart. I was standing at the altar, holding my fiancé's hands, looking into his eyes, ready to say, "I do." The guests were quiet, waiting for the vows, and for once, I felt like I had done something right. Like I had chosen happiness for myself. Then, she spoke. "I'll never bless this marriage." A gasp rippled through the crowd. I turned my head slowly, not wanting to believe my ears. But there she was, standing up in her chair, hands clenched into fists, looking at me like I was making the worst mistake of my life. My heart stopped. My fiancé, ex-fiancé, looked at her, then back at me. His jaw tightened. He let go of my hands, shoved them away like I burned him. And then, under his breath, he muttered, "Maybe she's right." And just like that, he walked out. I was frozen in place, too humiliated to even cry, too shocked to even react. My mother sat back down, calm as ever, like she had done nothing wrong. I didn't know it then, but this was never about my wedding. It wasn't about my fiancé. It was about her. And the reason she tried to ruin my life? It was worse than anything I could have imagined. The beginning of the nightmare growing up, my mother was the kind of woman people respected from a distance. She was beautiful, charming, and had a way of making people think she was the perfect parent. But behind closed doors, she was a master manipulator. I was never good enough. No matter what I did, she always found a way to criticize me. If I got an A on a test, she'd ask why it wasn't an A+. If I got a promotion, she'd find a flaw in my job. If I lost weight, she'd say I looked sickly. And if I gained weight, she'd say no one would ever love me. So when I met Daniel, my fiancé, I braced myself for her reaction. He was kind, stable, hardworking, not flashy, not for money, not someone she could brag about at her book club. But he loved me. And for once in my life, I felt like I had something that was mine. She hated that. From the moment she met him, she made it her mission to tear us apart. He's not ambitious enough. He comes from a broken home. He's just using you. He's not your equal. When none of that worked, she switched tactics. You'll regret marrying him. You'll be miserable. You'll end up just like me. And the worst one, if you marry him, I'll never forgive you. I should have cut her off then. But I didn't. I kept trying to prove to her that I was making the right choice. That he was good enough. And then, 2 weeks before the wedding, she dropped the final bombshell. "Cancel the wedding or I won't come." I laughed. I actually laughed, thinking she was bluffing. But she wasn't. She looked me dead in the eyes, cold and emotionless, and said, "I mean it." I told her she was being dramatic. That I wasn't going to let her control my life. She just smiled. "We'll see." I didn't realize what she meant. Not yet. The wedding day disaster the day of the wedding was a dream. At least, for the first few hours. The venue was beautiful, the guests were happy, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was living my own life. My mother arrived late, dressed like she was the star of the show. A long, floor-length gown that was way too extravagant for a wedding guest. She acted like she was bored, barely acknowledging me, spending most of the time making quiet comments to my aunt. I should have known she was waiting for the perfect moment. And then, at the altar, she finally did it. "I'll never bless this marriage." In front of everyone. My world shattered in an instant. Daniel, my ex-fiancé, let go of me like I was nothing. Like he had been waiting for an excuse to leave. And as he walked out, I saw it. The smallest, quickest smirk on my mother's face. She had won. Or at least, she thought she had. Because what I found out later, the real reason she sabotaged my life, it was beyond anything I could have imagined. The truth comes out in the days after the wedding. I barely left my room. I was humiliated. The whole town was talking about it. People whispered about how my own mother had publicly ruined my marriage. Some people even pitied me. But not her. She acted like nothing had happened. And then, 2 weeks later, I found out why. It was my aunt, the only sane person in my family, who finally told me the truth. "Your mother did this because she didn't want you to marry before her." I blinked. What? She's been dating someone. Someone younger. Someone she thinks she can marry. But if you got married first, she thought it would make her look old. Like some washed-up mother of the bride. I felt sick. She ruined my life over her own vanity? But it got worse. The man she was dating? It was Daniel's father. My mother had been secretly seeing my fiancé's dad for months. They had met at some charity event and started an affair. And when she realized I was going to get married first, she panicked. If I got married to Daniel, it would mean her boyfriend's son was now her son-in-law. And in her mind, that was unacceptable. So she destroyed my wedding. Publicly. To get what she wanted. And Daniel? He had known. Maybe not at first, but at some point, he figured it out. And instead of telling me, instead of standing by me, he let my mother manipulate him too. That's why he left. Not because he was doubting me. Because he couldn't handle the fact that his father and my mother were together. I wanted revenge. And oh, I got it. But that's a story for another time. The fallout, I felt like my soul had been ripped out of my body. For 2 weeks, I barely left my bed. My phone was flooded with messages, some from people offering fake sympathy, others just wanting gossip. My ex-fiancé? Not a word from him. My mother? She acted like nothing happened, like she hadn't just humiliated me in front of everyone I knew. But the worst part? I kept replaying it over and over. The altar. Her voice. I'll never bless this marriage. And then his voice. Maybe she's right. I wanted to scream. To cry. To burn everything down. Then, just as I thought I couldn't sink lower, my aunt dropped another bombshell. She's engaged, she told me one night over the phone. I almost dropped the glass of water in my hand. Who? Your mother. I felt my stomach flip. To Daniel's father, she continued. They made the announcement yesterday. I could barely breathe. My mother had destroyed my wedding, humiliated me in front of hundreds of people, and 2 weeks later, she was engaged? To his father? She won, I whispered. My aunt sighed. Not yet, she hasn't. Betrayal runs deep, I needed answers. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I called Daniel. He actually picked up. I could hear the hesitation in his voice, like he had been expecting my call but dreading it. I'm sorry, he said immediately. I laughed, but it came out broken. Are you? Silence. How long did you know? I asked, gripping the phone so hard my fingers hurt. He hesitated. That was enough of an answer. Before the wedding, he admitted. I closed my eyes. My worst suspicion was true. How long before? He sighed. A few months. A few months. So while I had been picking out flowers, sending invitations, and writing vows, my own fiancé had known his father was sleeping with my mother. And he never told me. Why didn't you say anything? My voice cracked. Because I didn't know what to do, he admitted. I thought maybe it was a fling, that they'd break it off. And then when they didn't, he exhaled. I couldn't handle it. The wedding, them, us. So instead of telling me, you let my mother publicly ruin me, I spat. He had the nerve to sound ashamed. I hung up before he could finish. I had my answer. And now, I had a plan. The truth comes to light, I knew my mother. She didn't care about love. She cared about power, control, and winning. And now that she had Daniel's father wrapped around her finger, she thought she had everything she wanted. But I had one thing she didn't. The truth. And I was going to use it to ruin her. So I did something risky. I reached out to Daniel's father. We had never been close. The few times we'd met, he had been polite but distant. I always got the feeling he didn't really approve of me, but now I knew why. He agreed to meet for coffee. When I walked into the cafe, I barely recognized him. He looked tired, stressed, like a man who wasn't sure if he had made the right decision. Good. I assume you know why I called, I said, sitting across from him. He sighed. Yes. I didn't waste time. How much do you know about my mother? He frowned. I know enough. I leaned forward. Do you? Because I don't think you do. And then I told him everything. How she had always manipulated people. How she had always tried to control me. How she had forced me to break up with my high school boyfriend because he didn't come for money. How she had ruined my college graduation by making the whole day about her. How she had threatened me, humiliated me, and, finally, destroyed my wedding just so she could have her own. By the time I was done, he looked pale. I had no idea, he murmured. Of course, he didn't. She had played him too. But I wasn't finished. I also know about the prenup, I said carefully. He stiffened. Bingo. I had overheard my aunt talking about it a few days ago. Apparently, Daniel's father had insisted on a prenup, but my mother had been fighting it. That told me one thing. She wasn't marrying for love. She was marrying for money. And now I had planted the seed of doubt. Would he still go through with it? Maybe. But now he'd start questioning. Watching. Wondering if my mother was everything she pretended to be. And if there was one thing I knew about my mother, it was this: the moment someone doubted her, she started slipping. And I was going to be there when she did. The first crack had happened faster than I thought. A week after our conversation, my mother showed up at my house, unannounced. She was fuming. What did you say to him? She hissed the moment I opened the door. I crossed my arms. Oh! Problems in paradise? Her face twisted with rage. You don't get to ruin my life just because yours is over. I laughed. actually laughed. You ruined my wedding, and now you're mad because I told the truth? She stepped forward, lowering her voice. If you think you can stop this wedding, you're wrong. I tilted my head. We'll see. I shut the door in her face. And just like that, the war had begun. The unraveling over the next few weeks, things started falling apart for her. First, the wedding plan stalled. Daniel's father suddenly wasn't in a rush to set a date. Then, she was mysteriously uninvited from one of her high society events. And then, the final blow, Daniel's father postponed the engagement indefinitely. I knew what had happened. He had finally seen through her. But she wasn't going down without a fight. And neither was I. Because while she was busy trying to salvage her relationship, I had been working on something else. Something bigger. Something that would make sure she never had control over me, or anyone else ever again. And once it was done, she would finally know what it felt like to have her whole world crumble. The collapse begins. I should have been satisfied. I had planted the seed of doubt in Daniel's father's mind, and it was working. My mother's perfect facade was starting to crack. But deep down, I knew her too well. She wasn't the type to sit back and let things slip through her fingers. No, she would fight, she would manipulate, and she would destroy anything in her way to get what she wanted. And I was still in her way. I just didn't expect how far she was willing to go. The first attack, it started small. A call from my landlord. You're 3 months late on rent, he said, annoyed. I blinked. What? No, I'm not. I pay automatically every month. Well, the payment stopped. If you don't pay by next week, I'll have to start eviction proceedings. My heart started pounding. This didn't make sense. I logged into my bank account and everything was gone. Not just my rent payments, my savings, my emergency fund, even my paycheck deposit. My account was wiped clean. I felt sick. There was only one person who could have done this. I called my bank, and after an hour on the phone, I got my answer. The withdrawals had been made under a joint account holder. My mother. My brilliant younger self had added her to my accounts years ago, back when I still believed she had my best interests at heart. I had meant to remove her, but I kept putting it off, thinking she'd never actually do something like this. I was wrong. I called her, shaking with rage. She answered on the first ring. I was expecting your call. You stole my money. My voice was dangerously calm. I didn't steal anything, she said, her tone sickeningly sweet. I simply moved some funds to a safer place. You've been making terrible decisions lately, and I couldn't just sit back and watch you ruin yourself. I gripped the phone so hard my fingers ached. I need that money. I have rent due, bills to pay. Well, she cut in, feigning concern. Maybe you should come home. Let me take care of you, like I always have. My stomach turned. This was her play. She wanted me desperate, crawling back to her, dependent on her for survival. She wanted to own me again. I hung up without another word. She thought she had won. But this was just fuel for the fire. The next betrayal, I needed money fast. So I swallowed my pride and reached out to someone I never thought I'd have to rely on again. Daniel. I didn't want to, but he owed me. I sent him a simple text. Me, can we talk? To my surprise, he responded immediately. Daniel, yeah. Can we meet in person? We met at a small cafe, far from our usual spots. The moment I saw him, I felt a wave of anger. This was the man who had stood at the altar with me and let me be humiliated. Who had known about our parents and said nothing. I sat down, skipping the small talk. I need a favor. His eyebrows lifted slightly. A favor? I exhaled sharply. My mother drained my accounts. I need to borrow some money until I fix it. He looked down at his coffee, silent for too long. I already knew what was coming. I don't think I can do that, he said finally. I stared at him, disbelief washing over me. You don't think you can? He had more than enough money. He came from a wealthy family, had a high-paying job. Hell, I had helped him financially at times when we were together. Look, he said, shifting uncomfortably. I just think it's a bad idea. Getting involved in all this again. I let out a cold laugh. Involved? You were involved the second you let my mother destroy my life in front of hundreds of people. He flinched. I'm sorry, okay? But I need to think about my own future. And that's when it hit me. I leaned back. She got to you, didn't she? He didn't answer, but he didn't have to. His silence was confirmation enough. She had bought his loyalty. Forget it, I said, standing up. You deserve each other. I walked out, feeling a kind of hatred I never knew I was capable of. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about survival. The game changes. I had one last card to play. Daniel's father. I needed to make sure he saw the real her before it was too late. So I dug. I spent hours searching through records, old articles, anything that could give me leverage. And then, finally, I found something. A name. A man my mother had been engaged to before my father. A man she had taken to the cleaners in a brutal divorce. A man who had filed a restraining order against her afterward. I tracked him down, praying he would talk to me. To my shock, he did. And what he told me, it changed everything. She ruined my life, he said bitterly. Drained my bank accounts, isolated me from my family, blackmailed me when I tried to leave. She's dangerous. Blackmailed. That one word set off alarm bells in my head. What kind of blackmail? I asked carefully. He hesitated, then sighed. She had pictures of me, compromising ones. She threatened to leak them to my employer, my family, everyone. My blood ran cold. Because suddenly, everything made sense. Her control over Daniel. Her power over his father. She had something on them. Something big. And if I could find out what it was, I could take her down. For good. The clock is ticking. I started watching her. Every move she made, every person she spoke to. I paid attention. And soon, I noticed something strange. She kept meeting with a man I didn't recognize. Always in secret, always looking over her shoulder. So I followed her. One night, I trailed her to a hotel where she met the man in a private lounge. I managed to get close enough to hear snippets of their conversation. Make sure there's no trace. If they find out we're both finished, he can never know. I recorded everything. And just like that, I had her. I didn't know exactly what she was hiding yet. But whatever it was big. And when I found out, she would finally know what it felt like to have her life ruined. I had the recording. I had the proof. I didn't know exactly what my mother was hiding, but I knew it was something big, something she was terrified of being exposed. And if there was one thing I had learned, it was that fear made people reckless. It was time to push her over the edge. The setup: I sent Daniel's father an anonymous email. No explanations, no demands, just a single audio file attached. Within minutes, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Who is this? Me, the person who's about to save you a fortune. I told him to meet me at a hotel bar, somewhere public. Somewhere my mother wouldn't expect. When he arrived, he looked 10 years older than the last time I'd seen him. He sat down, gripping his whiskey like it was the only thing keeping him upright. What the hell is this? He demanded. I leaned forward. It's the truth. He hit play on the recording, his eyes narrowing as my mother's voice spilled into the air. The fear, the secrecy, the desperation, it was all there. Make sure there's no trace. If they find out, we're both finished. He can never know. When the recording ended, his face was ashen. Who was she talking to? I shook my head. I don't know. But I can find out. He exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand over his jaw. If she's hiding something this big, she is, I confirmed. And you need to know what it is before you sign anything. His grip tightened on his glass. He wasn't stupid. He knew my mother was a manipulator, but now he had proof. I'll handle it, he muttered, standing up. Stay out of it. I smirked. Oh, I'm not done yet. The confrontation: I wasn't going to let my mother weasel her way out of this. She had destroyed my wedding in public. So I was going to destroy her in public. I waited for the perfect moment, a high-profile engagement party, thrown by her. A room full of socialites, business partners, and old money elites. The perfect audience. I walked in like I belonged there, dressed in the sleekest black dress I owned. Heads turned, whispers spread. Everyone knew what had happened at my wedding. They probably assumed I was here to make peace. I wasn't. I spotted my mother across the room, laughing like she hadn't ruined my life. Her fiancé stood beside her, stiff and silent. Good. He knew. I made my way to the stage, where a microphone was set up for speeches. My mother hadn't seen me yet. Perfect. I tapped the mic. The room quieted. My mother turned, her face freezing when she saw me. Hello, everyone, I said smoothly. For those of you who don't know, I'm the other bride my mother tried to become before she got bored and moved on to bigger things. A ripple of confused laughter. She took a step forward, eyes flashing. Get down from there. Now. I ignored her. I just wanted to say congratulations to the happy couple, and to share a little something I came across recently. I pulled out my phone and hit play. My mother's voice filled the room. Make sure there's no trace. If they find out, we're both finished. He can never know. Gasps. Murmurs. My mother went pale. And then, the final blow. I did some digging, I said, my voice calm. And I found out who she was talking to. I turned to Daniel's father. She was talking to her lawyer, I revealed. Because there is something you can never know. The entire room held its breath. I locked eyes with my mother. Tell them, I said. She shook her head, her hands trembling. I don't know what you're tell them. Silence. Then, Daniel's father spoke. If you don't, I will. Her mask cracked. She swallowed hard, looking around the room like a trapped animal. And then, in a voice so small, so unlike her, she whispered, "I never divorced my last husband." A collective gasp. My mind went blank. For a second, I couldn't breathe. "What?" Daniel's father demanded. She squeezed her eyes shut. "I never divorced him," she repeated, her voice barely audible. "Legally. I'm still married." The room exploded. People whispered, gasped, grabbed their phones. The scandal. The humiliation. And my mother? For the first time in my life, she looked small, powerless. I stepped off the stage and walked past her, whispering, "Now you know how it feels." And then I left. The engagement was called off immediately. My mother's reputation? Shattered. Word spread fast. Her friends distanced themselves. Her business connections evaporated overnight. And her real husband, the one she had secretly never divorced? He found out and he was furious. Daniel? He reached out once, trying to apologize. I blocked him. I moved out of state, started fresh. For the first time in my life, I was free. And my mother? She finally got to experience what it felt like to lose everything. I didn't feel sorry for her. Not even a little.